Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to dive deep into something I'm super passionate about, how to build solid, meaningful engagement with developers. And definitely stick around to the end of the video because I've got a bonus tip that's going to completely shift how you approach this kind of work. So let's dig into it. Now, tip number one is to speak their language. And no, I don't just mean Python and JavaScript. Here's the thing about developers. They have an uncanny ability to detect bullshit. If your messaging is filled with buzzwords like innovative, game-changing, or next-gen, they're tuning out well before you finish your first sentence. For example, GitLab have built amazing docs that are clear, direct, and technical with little to no fluffy language in there. They're written by developers for developers who just want clarity and honesty. So instead of hyping up your product or community with vague promises, focus on communicating what it actually does and how it helps. All you need to do is talk to them like you talk to a friend who happens to code. And no, you don't need to flex your technical knowledge unless it's absolutely relevant. Just be straightforward. If you don't know what speaking the developer language looks like, spend some time on developer forums or GitHub or even on X. You're going to soak it up. It's all about listening and mirroring their tone and priorities. Now, tip number two is to solve actual problems. You see, developers aren't coming to your community or using your product for fun. They're looking for solutions. So if you want to engage with them, we really need to get dialed into what their pain points are. What's frustrating about their workflows? What's slowing them down? What's stopping them from shipping that feature or fixing that bug? The more specific and practical you can be, the way better your developer engagement is going to be. For example, Olama do a great job here. They focus all their effort on enabling developers to more easily run large language models. And they've got a rapid feedback loop that influences both the features they build and the content and engagement they deliver to developers. Your blogs, webinars, and events should focus on helping developers to solve these real problems, not just pitching your product or building hype. If you can help a developer save time or learn something useful, they'll trust you. And that trust is the foundation of great developer engagement. Now, tip number three is to build for both introverts and extroverts. Here's a blindingly obvious secret about developers. They're not one-size-fits-all people. Some developers love jumping into lively debates on Discord and Slack. Others would rather poke their eyes out with a stick rather than join a group chat. So your job is to cater to both. For the introverts, create great self-service resources like documentation, tutorials, and videos, and give them the tools to learn and explore on their own time. For the extroverts, host live Q&As, hackathons, or meetups where they can connect with others. For example, Dagger have got live streams, ambassador programs, and more for the extroverts, as well as guided tutorials, Discord channels, and more for the introverts. They deliberately accommodate as many developer personas as possible. You see, a good community isn't about forcing people into the same box. It's about creating spaces where different people can thrive. All right, so now we're cooking, and you know what would really help the channel out a lot? A quick like on this video. So go tickle that little like button. Seriously, helps out a ton. All right, so tip number four is don't just ask for feedback, act on it. You see, developers are natural problem solvers, and they love giving feedback. But if that feedback goes into a black hole, they'll stop sharing. You need to close the loop. If somebody tells you your documentation is confusing, thank them, fix it, and then let them know it's been updated. If they suggest a feature for your product, acknowledge it, even if you can't act on it right away. For example, recently Microsoft released Flight Simulator 2024 with a pretty disastrous launch. Users and developers were infuriated with what happened, but Microsoft and their development partner Asobo have got their feedback snapshot that shows popular reported bugs, and then they provide feedback on these fixes via their developer streams and blog. This significantly resolved issues, because transparency is key here. When developers see that their input actually makes a difference, they'll engage more deeply and feel like valuable members of your community. Now, tip number five is absolutely critical, and that is that you need to make your onboarding process stupidly simple. I cannot stress this enough. If your onboarding process is clunky or confusing, developers will bail, and they'll bail fast. They don't have the patience for a 17-step sign-up form or a poorly written quick start guide that is anything but quick. Your goal should be to get them up and running in less than 10 minutes or less. For example, Railway's Quick Start tutorial shows 3 different ways of deploying in a matter of minutes. Each step is clear, illustrated, and reduces overall cognitive load for the developer. It's absolutely critical to invest in clear, concise documentation, providing example projects, and removing any unnecessary friction that stands in the way. Think of onboarding as your first impression. Go out and make it count. Now, tip number 6 is that consistency beats flashiness. Let me tell you something, you don't need to be the loudest, flashiest presence in the room to win developers over. This is a giant misnomer in developer relations. What matters is showing up consistently. Post content regularly, respond to questions in your community, and keep your promises. For example, LangChain are consistently posting super valuable content, tutorials, and release notes that are focused and specifically designed for developers. Developers value this kind of reliability. They want to know that you're not just going to disappear after that big launch or that flashy event. Consistency builds trust, and trust keeps people engaged over the long term. Now, speaking of consistency, if you want to reliably increase the consistency of your developer engagement and growth, you should absolutely check out our community leadership core. We're kind of like a personal trainer for building developer engagement, helping you to figure out what work has the biggest impact, helping you to dial in how you deliver that work well, and holding you accountable to get amazing results. Check out the link down there where you can find out more. Now, tip number 7 is to give credit where it's due. Recognition goes a long way with developers. When somebody contributes a pull request, answers a tough question in your forum, or shares a useful insight, acknowledge them. Shout them out on social media, feature them in your newsletter, or just send them a simple thank you note. And by the way, handwritten thank you notes, always the best. This is especially important in open source projects. For example, Kubernetes regularly highlights contributors in their release notes, on stage at KubeCon, in their project pavilion at events, and more. This is part of what has contributed to their amazingly successful developer community. These little gestures make people feel valued. It creates a positive feedback loop. They just feel special. So when developers see that their efforts have been appreciated, they feel much more likely to stay engaged and contribute again, and talk about you and your organization. Now, tip number 8 is to respect their time. Here's a universal truth. Developers are super busy. Between coding, debugging, and dealing with their own internal pressures to ship, they just don't have a lot of time for fluff. Keep your workshops short and to the point. Make your tutorials concise. And if you're reaching out directly, always have a clear purpose. A good example of this is DigitalOcean, who've been delivering rock-solid tutorials for many years. These tutorials are not just high quality, but they're well-written, short, and they get right to the point. Developers appreciate this kind of efficiency, and respecting their time shows that you understand their world. Now, tip number 9 is to build a feedback loop between your product and your community. Your product and your community should work hand in hand. Use your community as a sounding board for product ideas, and use your product to create better experiences for your community. For example, if a lot of developers in your Discord are struggling with a specific feature, take that feedback to your product team and make improvements. Then go back to the community and let them know what's been updated. That piece is a critically important part of the process. Let them know. This kind of feedback loop creates a sense of partnership and shows developers that their input actually matters on a day-to-day basis. Now, tip number 10 is to invest in people and not just platforms. At the end of the day, communities are not built on Slack, Discord, and GitHub. They're built on relationships. Take the time to get to know your most active members. Engage with them on a personal level. Developers are loyal to people, not just brands. If they trust you and they feel connected to you, they'll stick around even if your product isn't perfect. Relationships are what turn casual users into really passionate advocates. Now, earlier on, I said this. Definitely stick around to the end of the video because I've got a bonus tip that's going to completely shift how you approach this kind of work. So what is this bonus tip? Well, start small, but dream big. You don't need a massive team or huge budget to build amazing developer engagement. Start with one great piece of content, one meaningful connection, or one small win. Focus on delivering real value to the developers you're engaging with right now. Progress over perfection is everything. When you build quality into the foundation of what you do, the growth will follow naturally. And don't be afraid to dream big. Just remember that every great community started out small. Now, before you go, throughout these tips, I've talked about the importance of great developer tutorials. And if you click over here, you can see my video on one mistake that ruins the vast majority of developer tutorials. I strongly recommend you go and watch this. It's going to have a huge impact on your overall developer engagement.